Welcome to 30 Minutes of Faith. We're very happy to have Mindy Russell with us today from the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy of Sacramento. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Will you start out by telling us where you were born and raised and grew up and went to high school and all of that stuff so
Sure.
people will know?
Okay. So born in Annapolis, Maryland. Lived there up
beautiful
until,
city.
Oh, it is gorgeous. But home is now Sacramento. We've been here for 33 years, so we love it in Sacramento. But was born into a family, 3 sisters, 1 brother, and I grew up in Annapolis, Maryland until about 18, where my husband and I went over to Germany and was there. He was in the military, and we were able to be there during the Munich Olympics, and that's where I got my glimpse of helping people in crisis. Knew that was my niche, right? Even to that point. And then when we came back home, started to raise a family. I have a daughter who has my granddaughter, Alexandra, and my son who has my other granddaughter, Arya Rose. And their names are Jeremy and Angela. So my husband and I are chaplains, and we have been working together ever since we got married, which was 44 years ago.
And so how did you end up in Sacramento per se?
You know, for 7 years, I sang up and down the East Coast. My dad was out here, invited me to come and sing at his church. We fell in love with Sacramento, California, and said, we want to come out here. And basically, within 3 months, we had sold our house, and my sister and her family had sold their house, and we came across country and never looked back. It really, truly felt like this is where God wanted us to be. Stopped singing for about 5 years, and then gradually started singing again for the law enforcement family. So,
Bonds or ties to the Navy in Annapolis by any chance?
only just lived by the Naval
by.
Academy. Just really respected military. My husband served in the Army, so.
How about any time on the Chesapeake Bay and all of those things growing up?
Oh, those blue shell crabs, yummy. Yeah, we did all the things you can imagine on the East Coast. Ocean City was our place to go for the summer, and playing in the Chesapeake Bay, skiing in the Chesapeake Bay. This was the place to be if you loved water sports.
I have a cousin, a girl who has lived her whole adult life on the bay, and as far as she's concerned, that's where heaven and earth are, and everything else is sort of inconsequential. Yeah, it's really, really fun. And we've gotten there a few times in the last 20 years. It's a beautiful area. Now let's talk about chaplaincy. Most people would think a chaplain is there to pray with you and hold your hand, but we know it's a whole lot more than that. So teach us a little bit about what you do routinely.
You know, there's all kinds of chaplains, and that's one of the things that people need to be aware of. It's not just the military and hospital chaplains that is pretty much in the forefront. But we also have chaplains that are all over this country doing all kinds of things, from sports chaplains to race car chaplains to pretty much anything you want to name. Airport chaplains. Yeah. So when I bring it into the perspective of what our law enforcement chaplaincy of Sacramento does, we serve law enforcement agencies, 19, which are city, county, state, and federal, all either booked out of or around the Sacramento area. And then we have community chaplains that serve alongside of officers to work with victims. When someone calls 911, they expect an officer to come. Then our officers call 911, which is our phone number, because when they need help, we're out there to help them do their job and for us to be able to help the people get back to a new kind of normal. We also have chaplains which are actually trauma responders, and that's a clarification too. Because our training is all in about trauma, the title chaplain is who we are, but what we do is trauma response care. So we are not going around praying for people and having Bible studies. In fact, we are considered constitutional chaplains, which is basically we have 3 perspectives or objectives, if you would. We're religiously neutral. We serve everybody with or without faith. We do not have an entanglement with government. We don't tell what the government should do, and the government doesn't tell us what to do. We have that freedom. And then thirdly, which is the big one, is that we have a secular purpose. So that's why I say our title is chaplain, and it brings about volumes of confidentiality, people without agendas, people with not representing per se a religion or a specific church or faith building, but they represent the departments of whom they serve. And the religious and the secular response is to help people in trauma.
Are you still on the front lines, or are you mostly administering?
Oh, I'm still on the front lines and ministering and fundraising and
All of those other things?
all of it.
In your chaplaincy, how many people do you think you touch in the course of a year?
Oh my goodness. We actually keep a paperless activity report, because when we report to our donors or to our law enforcement agencies to whom we serve, they can't take the time to read every narrative of who we helped. But they can read stats, and they can understand the black and white of numbers. And so last year, over 4,100 call outs.
Wow.
That's not 4,100 people. That,
Sure.
you know, on the average, we are with 4 to 8 people on every call out. When we go into schools, and we have several proactive events that we do in the schools, we can do 700 students in one program by showing them a proactive way of being healthy. So 4,100 call outs, 87,000 hours last
Wow.
year documented. So when you ask how many people, I can't imagine to give you a number, but I'm going to tell you that we know that we have, 1.8 million people in our community, and word's getting out that this is a team of people that they can count on round the clock to call and come out when they're in crisis.
And what do they want when they're in crisis?
You know, they don't know what they want a lot of times. In fact, when you talk to somebody that has just experienced the worst thing that's ever happened to them, and you ask them a question, how can I help you? They don't know how to help you. And so that saying that says people don't remember what you said, and people won't remember what you did, but people will forever remember how you made them feel. I think that answers that question.
So comfort,
Compassion,
compassion.
comfort. We have found people want 5 things when they are in crisis or they've experienced a trauma. 1, they want compassion. They do not want sympathy or pity. They want empathy and compassion. True, I connect with you, not because I understand what you're going through, but I connect with you because I've experienced a pain and I know what that pain feels like that you're going through. They want to be treated fairly. They want justice during that time of crisis. They want true and honest information. They don't want false hopes. They don't want promises. They want accuracy. And mind you, when people are in crisis, they only remember 10% of what you're saying anyway.
Sure.
So we don't have to give them a lot of information. In fact, we do it very slow and deliberate. They also need physical things taken care of. You know, it's amazing standing in the rain just to be thinking about covering them with an umbrella is something that is beyond what most people think about at the time. And so all of these things are the things that we do when somebody's in a crisis without having to ask somebody, what do you need?
You know, I watched a TV show several days ago where a woman had been in a circumstance where somebody got killed, and she watched all of that unfold and all those other things, and it traumatized her. At home, she didn't think her husband and children and her sister, and they couldn't identify to that. And she sort of, wasn't throw a sulk, but she sort of pulled in because nobody will understand what I went through. But a man at work came to see her and said, I just want to tell you something. When I was 14, I was with my brother, and a drunk driver T-boned us, and I watched him die at the side of the road, and I watched all of the gawkers come by and just look at him. And he reached in his pocket and said, here's a card to someone who will listen to you. And he said, welcome to the club. And he walked out. And at that point in time, then it was like, she said, oh, there's somebody else in the world who's been through this, somebody else who understands. So then she was able to, let go and begin to talk and some of those other things. That was a powerful, that whole thing unfolded in
Right.
3 or 4 minutes, and it was very powerful to me. I thought, wow, that's really something. And that mourning with people who have mourned, cause to mourn, and holding up the hands of the sick and the weary, and all of the religious things we've heard all of our life that have to do with compassion and comfort is very, very important. Now, how much longer will you do this?
Till God tells me not to. I always joke and say, I'm not going to retire until I die because they don't need chaplains in heaven. But you know what? There's such a desire and a passion still. It's just as fresh as I did it 25 years ago. There's such a love for this law enforcement family that we have the honor and privilege to be trusted by. And then to be able to walk into somebody's life. Every victim has said in some fashion or form, I never thought this would happen to me. You see, this is beyond just the typical compassion that most families will give to one another. But that feeling that you were just saying that woman experienced, nobody understands me. Well, we have trained to work with people in trauma. This is a trauma training that anybody can take. You don't have to be a chaplain to take. But this is a training that helps us be able to see beyond the facade that most of us carry all day long and all through the year. I joke and say we wear Halloween masks all year long. All of us do. And I'm telling you the truth, because when somebody says to you, "Hi, how are you?" the first thing that we say out of our mouth is, "Fine." That's our Halloween mask. That's our facade to say everything's good, when behind that mask we could be crying, we could be afraid, we could be grieving.
Do you go home some nights and just sit down and cry?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's healthy.
What?
It's healthy.
Oh, it's healthy. And we are really into self-care. We're into being responsible for ourselves, but also our organization takes a lot of steps to be able to take care of our chaplains. We have different kinds of things in place to make sure that they are debriefed after each scene they're at. Then they get debriefed if there's a huge or a high profile or something that has really kind of taken them out of their element for a long time. We will have a critical incident stress debriefing, the same thing we do for our officers when they're involved in a critical incident. So we're very, very concerned for our chaplains to stay healthy. We do not want to cause harm for people that we're helping, nor the people that are helpers.
Did you go to New York at 9/11?
I did. That's a story in itself. I was a responder for national disasters during that year. I had signed up for September, and I got to say, I signed up in September because that's usually good, mild weather wherever we are. That day that happened at 6 o'clock in the morning when my pager went off, and you got to go back to those days. Pagers were this big. Cell phones were this big, antennas were this big. Okay, so visualize, here's this huge, gigantic brick of a pager that goes off, and it was red, and it's dancing across my end table, and I'm looking at it going, the battery must be going dead. You prepare and you prepare, and then when it finally is calling you, it's like, well, that must be something wrong with the pager. So then I checked the number, I called the number, and that was in between the two planes hitting the building. So at that point in time, in that instant, it was a national problem because there was an airplane that went into a building. That's all it was. And then when we all watched in horror the second plane hitting the building, we knew it was more than that. We had war. The terrorists were in our country. So I called back to Washington, D.C. to tell them I'm ready to go. I always lived with a go bag. I have 3 go bags in my car today and was ready to go. And actually, I went with the USAR team down from Travis, and there was 35 of us, and we were the only airplane in the sky ordered by President Bush.
Really?
So we were in the sky all by ourselves, but we were escorted by fighters just to make sure we got there. So I was there for 16 days at Ground Zero. At Ground Zero itself, in the morgue in Family Assistance Center was really truly the assignment that I had, and that was amazing. There was 5,000 victims, there were 1,200 homicide officers, and we had people from all faiths coming, saying they wanted to help. So this was the thing that I was charged with. About 3 days into it, the mayor's office called to say I was in charge of making sure everybody was there to help. Well, of course they were, weren't they? So what we had to do was we had to create a training to make sure everybody was doing the same thing, because we didn't want anybody harmed. And we wanted people to come in to serve the victims, not to have a different agenda. So when I talk about this trauma training that we're doing today, this was evolved from Ground Zero. The United States Department of Justice, basically in 2002, commissioned me for 3 years to go all over the country to listen to victims, to listen to law enforcement, first responders, medical, to create a curriculum to help people in trauma. So we get to teach that today, right here in Sacramento, for all the people in the nation to really want to be able to help people in trauma.
Who's your chaplain? Who provides you comfort and compassion?
Well, on my board at the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy, I have 2 pastors right now, actually 3 pastors right now. So I am accountable to them, but they're also my pastors that I go to for them to pray with me. My husband's a chaplain, so we're accountable to one another. One of my sisters is a senior chaplain and past president of a law enforcement organization, so she also. And so what I'm trying to say here is for everybody, you have to have a support system.
Absolutely.
And you have to have the emotional support system that feels your pain, that is invested emotionally to you, but you need that support system that's objective and can see the bigger picture for you. And then the informational and the instrumental support that can do things for you and get you some information. So I feel like at this point, I'm constantly checking that I have a well-rounded support system that will meet me where I am when I need them, just like I'm part of other support systems. And just another thing is, we chaplains hate to say I need help. Kind of like law enforcement and pastors. We don't like to say we need help, so we have a code word, and it's really effective. When somebody calls and says, let's go have pie, one thing that happens, you're going to get a good slice of pumpkin pie, and you get a listening ear. Because so many times when people are hurting, they just want someone to listen to them.
Of course.
And if you're not trained in that, you're going to try to be a part of the story they want to tell. So these are some of the clues that we do to help one another and help others.
Now, we're recording this in the spring of 2015, but in the summer, the chaplains in America from law enforcement are coming to Sacramento for a convention.
Yes.
And they have involved us in kicking off with a prayer service and those kinds of things. And I've had lunch with a couple of the people, and this is pretty exciting stuff. So tell us more. What goes on at those? This is 3 or 4 days of more training and
more training. It's the annual training seminar for the International Conference of Police Chaplains. This is a dynamic organization that keeps us credible and keeps us in training.
It's a good way to say that.
Mm-hmm. And so we're just lucky to have them all come from all over the world, and we could have 400 to 800 chaplains representing all kinds of city law enforcement, state, county, federal. They all come, and our whole objective is to continue to be trained to be the best we can. I use this expression, and I love it, and you can use it for your work or for your own church. But I say to chaplains, if every chaplain was like you in action and in deed, what would the chaplaincy look like? Every chaplain should rise above and beyond the standards we set. And we have pretty high standards. As we said, anybody can be a chaplain, but you have to meet the qualifications. And those qualifications are there in place to make sure We get the people that are willing to help people, almost sacrificial, because you know what? You have to put down self to be able to serve and do it effectively.
Several years ago, I talked to a man who had survived Pearl Harbor. He was 84, I think, or 80 something. And he had been so severely injured that a chaplain on the scene performed last rites for him.
Wow.
And then he was hauled off with 4 or 5 other guys to just sort of get out of the zone, and they'd see if they could get him medical help and all those other things. Anyway, he recovered, and he was telling me, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I'll say 8 years later, he got a chance to talk to that chaplain who had performed last rites for him. And they cried together, and they hugged, and they sort of danced around. He said we were like a couple little third grade kids that just won a marble championship, you know. But he was very tender about it. It had been all those years ago, whatever the math did, you know, 50, 60 years ago. He remembered that distinctly. He could hear what was being said to him with the last rites, and just sort of, he said, I was thinking, well, okay, well, this is the end, this is it, and you know, my mother and dad will know that I've had last rites, and this will be good. And he said I was very much at peace. And then a day or two later, he was still alive and breathing, and you know, away he went. That was a sweet story. He was telling it to several of us. I wasn't the only one there. There were 6 or 8 of us listening, but he was very tender about what that chaplain had just brought to him at that moment in time, and then had slipped away, and you know, that was that. It was very meaningful.
Wow.
Yeah.
But you know, we have that opportunity because during the time of a tragedy, most people, number one, nobody wants to join that club, a victims club. And sometimes in the midst of the tragedy, we are the reminder that they have experienced something horrible. But we're also, I believe, the reminder that we bring God's hope. I believe that's what the chaplain does. And whether they ever say thank you or not, I know it is embedded in their heart forever. And so when we go away, we really don't ever expect to hear from any of our family members or any of the people that have been helped. But it's so sweet when we get a word or a note or a card for people thanking us for something that's happened years ago, months ago, to say how much we meant to them during that time. And we have had so many valuable relationships formed out of that tragedy. I can call out names of families that I still stay in touch with at Ground Zero, people that we've worked with where children were murdered or missing or died accidentally, family members, whether they're law enforcement or in our community. So I get what you're saying. When people walk up and say, do you remember me? I'm telling you, it's amazing how immediately it floods back to that time where we were helping that person. I might not remember their name, but it's amazing. It's supernatural, really, to be able to look at that person and almost to detail be able to tell them, yes, I do remember you. I helped you with your father's funeral, or we were there at the scene, that kind of thing. It's amazing. But people send us thank you notes way far after it's happened because they've been able to process, and now they're at a new stage in their life.
Well, let me say quickly for all of Sacramento, thank you for all that you do. I have a question. About 15 years ago, my wife and I were on one of the floating docks in Old Sacramento, and a boat coming under the bridge got caught and tipped, and it sunk. And about 40 people of us stood there and watched summer evening. And the man wanted to stay with the boat. A woman that was with him, who turned out to be his wife later, got in the water and swam over and was pulled out. And then she was panicking, hollering at him, come, you know, get away from the boat, it's going to sink. A nice little, you know, fishing boat. So when it was finally, apparently it was going to sink and go down, you know, he jumped into the water, but he hit his head, and so another guy jumped in, and, you know, they pulled him in, they brought him over on the dock. And the woman was saying, somebody pray for my husband, somebody pray for my husband. And at that moment in time, a blonde woman stepped forward and said, I'm a chaplain. And she knelt down and prayed. And I've wanted to ask you if that by any chance was you. Down on the river.
Down on the river, you know, we have done, I'm going to tell you, I think I know who the chaplain was. I don't think it was me.
Okay.
The reason why I'm saying that is we've done a lot of those kind of calls, and I just don't want to take the credit for another chaplain, but we are so faceless. And a lot of chaplains,
enough.
you know, but one of the things that I do know is that we have opportunities so often during the summer to go to the scenes, and we don't know up until that point when we're there what has happened
What you're gonna
before.
find,
So it could have been that we walked right into it, or we were standing there alongside of you. I think the chaplain that I'm talking about is still with us, but yeah.
Well, my wife and I moved over and knelt down by them, but she was holding one of his hands and one of his wife's hands.
Wow.
And it was tender.
Yeah.
And you could see he was going to be okay. He had a,
Yeah.
he was dinged and he was bleeding a little bit, but he wasn't, in a serious critical. And about the
beautiful.
time that prayer was really getting going, the top of the boat went under the water, and it was gone. And then everybody was saying, well, the river's not all that deep. Who's going to get the boat out of there before, and so all of this was going back and forth.
Wow.
And she just ministered to he and her. And about that time, somebody had called an ambulance, and paramedics were showing up and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It was a pretty little sweet, tender window in time.
Yeah.
And I've been going to ask you that for 2 or 3 years. I can't ever remember to do it.
But she was blonde.
Well, and
15
women
years ago,
women
wow.
nurture really, really well. It's not just, they nurture really well.
But
well,
you know what? Men that have that mercy gift, they're phenomenal.
I
because,
agree.
and not that I'm saying not everybody has it, but when a man has a true mercy gift as one of the top 10, they go far beyond because they don't allow their emotions to get interfere. Sometimes we women have to kind of gauge that in.
Now we're drawing near the end,
Aw.
so I want to, and it goes by at the speed
It
of light. It seems like.
does.
I want to ask you the question I always ask: that if you could do something magical and wave your wand and fix or repair or turn something wonderful, what would it be?
Oh, wow. I've seen so many hurting hearts over the years. And I think the ones that hurt the most have no faith. So if I had a magic wand and I could say, what would I like is there's always going to be hurting people. There's always going to be tragedies. I would wish that they at least have a relationship with a God that loves them so much.
When people lose hope, it's just despair in capital letters, isn't it?
It is.
Thanks very, very much. It's nice to be with you. Appreciate you being
Be
here.
with you.